ठुक्क हाम्रो कम्पनीको मान्छे भेटे रे यार
कम्पनीले भेट्यो नि अब
केही छैन यार
2 days ago, a mass of ice and rock collapsed onto the border between Nepal and Tibet, blocking a mountain stream and forming a natural dam. When that dam failed, the entire volume released at once into the Botkoshi River and down into Nepal's Rasua district. There was no rainstorm and no warning. Villages, a border crossing, hydropower plants, roads and bridges were destroyed within minutes, and the surge kept going, carrying debris and people more than 100 kilometers downstream. The confirmed death toll now stands at 389. More than 900 people are still unaccounted for, 517 of them foreign nationals. And upstream of the border, a second flood is already building. That figure has climbed relentlessly. When the first reports came out of the border zone, officials spoke of 7 confirmed deaths. Within 24 hours, it had passed 100, then 200, then 300. Every one of those increases came from the same place. Bodies are being pulled out of rivers 100 kilometers downstream from where the mountain gave way. That single detail explains the scale of what happened better than any other. Of the hundreds of bodies recovered so far, only 17 were found in Rasua, the district where the flood began. The rest were carried out of the mountains entirely. Chitwan, down on the flat plains of southern Nepal, accounts for 132. Nal Parasi East accounts for 82. More were recovered in Dading, Gorkha, Nuwakot, Tanahu, and Nawalparasi West. The morgue in Chitwan filled to capacity, and bodies had to be transferred to Tanahu, with a separate identification center now being set up because so many of the dead cannot yet be named. Analysis of the wave itself explains why it reached so far. A senior scientist studying the event calculated that the surge covered the first 22 kilometers of its journey at an average speed of 193 kilometers per hour. That is close to 14 miles in 6 minutes and 50 seconds. This was not water rising. This was a wall of liquefied rock, ice, and mud, moving down a confined gorge faster than a car on a motorway, and nothing in its path had time to respond. trigger was an ice and rock avalanche high on the frontier above the Lend Kola, a tributary that feeds the boat Koshi. The collapse dammed the river. Water piled up behind that natural blockage until it failed and everything released at once. Satellite imagery captured the aftermath along the border. Buildings and roads scoured completely away at Timur and Rasuagati, and the trekking hub of Siapurbesi buried under mud. The number of people out of contact has grown rather than shrunk. Nepal's disaster authority listed 910 people unaccounted for in its evening bulletin, while police were working from a figure of 826. Officials have been careful to explain that these two counts are not contradictory so much as incomplete, and that the true number has not settled. Among the missing are 517 foreign nationals. The largest group is 177 Indians. 63 are American. 34 are Australian. 33 are British. 25 are Canadian. Roughly 100 Chinese nationals are missing on the Nepali side alone. 127 Nepali travelers are also unaccounted for, along with 162 residents of Rasuwa and Nuakat and 104 army, police, customs, and immigration staff whose posts were washed away. Officials keep repeating one point about that list, and it matters. Being out of contact is not the same as being dead. The border post is gone. Mobile networks, power lines, and roads through the gorge no longer exist. Many of the people on that list are almost certainly alive and simply unable to reach anyone. Verification is slow because there is no infrastructure left to verify through. The reason the foreign figure is so high comes down to timing. Rasuagati is the main overland gateway from Nepal into Tibet for the Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage, and this is peak season for that route. Most of those now missing were moving in organized convoys between Kathmandu and the border when the water came down. Rescue operations have scaled up dramatically. 69 helicopter sorties lifted 716 people out of the affected zone in a single day, and another 756 were brought out by road. Around 13,000 security personnel have been deployed. 73 injured people are in hospital. Named lists of those rescued have been published, including Nepali, Indian, Chinese, Korean, and American citizens, which is the only way many families have received confirmation that their relatives are alive. The damage to infrastructure is close to total in places. At least 19 road bridges have been destroyed or severely damaged, along with roughly 40 kilometers of road. The entire 42-kilometer route from Becherwadi in Nuwakot up to the Rasuwagati border crossing has been broken at multiple points, including several concrete bridges. A 16-kilometer section nearer the border, only recently upgraded with Chinese financing, was swept away completely. That road is Nepal's principal overland trade link to Tibet and the pilgrimage route, and it does not currently exist. Around 430 megawatts of hydropower capacity remains offline, more than 12% of national generation. The Rasuwagati plant, the Sanjan Kola project, Upper Trishuli 3A, Chilim, and Devikat were all hit. And there is now a second threat building in the same place.
कृषि विकास बैंक यहाँतिर केही छैन सब घरहरु पुर्याहा सानसानो घरहरु सब पुर्याए कृषि विकास बैंक पुर्याए हो यो चाहिँ हाम्रो
China's water ministry has warned that a new barrier lake has formed just north of the border, holding around 2 million cubic meters of water. It is already overflowing. Projections indicate a further 3 million cubic meters could drain into it within days. In other words, the same mechanism that produced this catastrophe is assembling itself again, upstream of communities that have already lost everything. The head of the United Nations Humanitarian Office said those warnings should be taken extremely seriously and confirmed that satellite monitoring is being used to try to anticipate a second event. Nepal has restricted traffic on the highway and cleared riverbanks as a precaution. The Red Cross has warned that the continued risk of landslides and further flooding is making the search for survivors more dangerous for the crews carrying it out. None of this is happening for the first time. 14 months earlier, the very same stream produced a glacial outburst flood that destroyed the border bridge at almost exactly this spot and killed 9 people. Two catastrophic dam burst floods in the same short valley inside a year and a half is not coincidence. It is a pattern, and glaciologists have been describing the mechanism behind it for years. Warming is destabilizing ice and frozen ground across the high Himalaya, loosening slopes that held for centuries and creating meltwater pools contained by nothing more than loose rubble. When those fail, the result is what happened here. Immediate priorities remain reaching the districts of Rasua, Nuwakot, and Dading, where communities are still isolated, and delivering medicine, clean water, sanitation, and shelter to people who have lost their homes. Identification of the dead is expected to take considerable time, and the number of confirmed fatalities is still expected to rise as teams work along the riverbanks downstream. For the communities that survived, the immediate problem is isolation. The road that connected this entire valley to the rest of Nepal no longer exists in any usable form, which means fuel, food, medicine, and heavy equipment can only arrive by helicopter. That is workable for evacuation and for small deliveries, but it cannot sustain thousands of people through a monsoon season. Villages that were a 4-hour drive from Kathmandu are now effectively cut off from the country they belong to. And rebuilding 42 kilometers of mountain road through a gorge that is still collapsing is not a project measured in weeks. The economic damage extends well past the valley itself. The crossing at Rasuagati handled a substantial share of Nepal's overland trade with China, and it has gone along with the customs yard, the warehouses, and the vehicles parked there. The hydropower plants that were destroyed represent years of investment and a significant piece of the country's plan to generate its own electricity rather than import it. Replacing that capacity means starting over on projects that took a decade to build the first time, in a valley that has now demonstrated twice in 14 months what it is capable of doing to anything built beside the river. The harder question is whether it makes sense to rebuild in the same place at all. The Lendi Kola has produced 2 catastrophic outburst floods since July of last year. The slopes above it are still unstable, the glaciers feeding it are still retreating, and a barrier lake is filling upstream right now. Engineers and glaciologists have been arguing for years that monitoring systems and early warning stations should be installed across these high Himalayan basins, because the technology to detect a forming barrier lake from orbit already exists, and the cost is trivial compared to what was lost here. What has been missing is not the capability. It is the decision to treat these valleys as places where this will happen again, rather than as places where it happened once.